Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level. Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase, the podcast that helps you succeed in your business, career, and life. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group, and with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing today?
Doing great. How about you, Eric?
I'm doing fantastic. It's been a big couple of days with sports. You had the Super Bowl this weekend. Now we've got spring training for baseball kicking off. The pitchers and catchers are reporting today. And I always love the beginning of spring training. First of all, because every team is still even. Everybody's still got a shot to go all the way. But also because it's really the first big sign that, yes, spring is coming. And I, for one, have gotten really tired of snow this winter.
Yeah, we've actually had our share of it more than we had the last few years. But basically, what we're getting this year used to be the normal. So
Yeah, I mean, this hasn't been an unusual year, but we've gotten away for so long with so little. But we're expecting a couple more storms throughout the country over the next few days. And it's funny because my wife spoke to my son, who now lives in Virginia, and he is now convinced that he is the snow god. Because since moving to Virginia, Virginia has gotten more snow than Connecticut. And he says it's followed him down.
okay, I know you missed them, but can you keep them out of the state? I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
right. Just keep him down there. Yeah. Bring him back up here during the summer. You know.
Yeah.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about confirmation bias. And the first thing I want to do is actually define what we mean by bias, because bias has got a fairly loaded implication to it. And that's not necessarily what we're referring to. When people talk about bias, usually they're talking about something very serious: racial bias, religious bias. But at its core, bias is just a preference. So we're not talking about prejudice or things like that. We're just talking about how people prefer to do things and the topics that they prefer to look at. And the example when I give talks about confirmation bias, the example I give about bias is there's a local television station, and their newscast has a bias for fire. If there is a fire anywhere in the state of Connecticut, they've got a crew there covering it. It could be a major fire, it could be a minor fire, but they're going to cover it because they have a bias towards covering fire. I don't know why they have this bias. I assume it does well in the ratings for them, but that's their bias. So that's the sort of thing we're talking about, is just things that we fall into and get used to doing. Now, of course, a confirmation bias is the act of only looking at sources of information that agree with that bias. Now, this has a number of different effects. The biggest effect is holding you back from achieving more because you're essentially stuck in your comfort zone. when you fall in with a confirmation bias. You're not stretching yourselves to where the opportunities are. Now, for the most part, that's obviously not good. I actually had a brief conversation that gave an example of how a confirmation bias can actually be dangerous. A friend of mine on Facebook posted that her doctor told her she needed to lose a few pounds. Not much. She's certainly not overweight, but she had to bring down her blood sugar because it was a little bit high. Not high enough to be considered diabetes, but the doctor wants her to bring this down. Now, aside from years of work in scientific research at pharmaceutical companies, I have had in my lifetime both diabetes, which is high blood sugar, and hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. So this is a topic I happen to know backwards and forwards. And I gave her some simple tips of things she can put in her diet that'll help make it easier on her. Well, another friend of ours joined in the conversation and said, "Oh, you have to avoid these things." And what she put was completely inaccurate. And I told her, no, that's a myth. That's avoiding these things is actually going to make the problem worse. And she said, well, I follow Eastern medicine. Well, this wasn't accurate for Eastern medicine either. But I said to her, what you need to do, go to PubMed, take a look. Now, PubMed, for those of you who don't know, is a site that indexes scientific journals, and it indexes basically all of them. Now, the drawback is that all you can really see is a summary of each research report, unless you actually subscribe to some fairly pricey scientific journals. But it does give you the basics of each research report, and it indexes all of them. So you can see not just a research report, but research report that confirm what it said, research reports that oppose what it said. You get the full gamut. And when I told her this is where she should be, you can get more information on this, she went, well, no, I just follow what my Eastern mentor says. And she wouldn't even look at opposing information. Now, again, I don't care how she lives her life, but the fact that she's spreading information that was actually detrimental to somebody's health and not even willing to look at a broad range of other research, this is a problem. And we're starting to see this more and more, especially online, when people are getting information from memes rather than reputable sources.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all kinds of information out there on everything these days. I mean, I went to my good old companion online, artificial intelligence, and they know everything. And I looked up confirmation bias, the problem of, and how to overcome it. And basically, just as you said, their definition, confirmation bias is the tendency to actively seek out and interpret information that confirms your existing beliefs
Yep.
while ignoring or dismissing information that contradicts them, essentially creating a distorted view of reality by only focusing on evidence that supports your pre-existing opinions. And a lot of this is just staying in your own comfort zone and not
Yep.
wanting to reach out. And there's all kinds of information out there. It continues on, those strategies to overcome confirmation bias. Number one, which you just mentioned, seek out diverse perspectives. I mean, my family, cholesterol runs high and this and that and whatever. And yet my parents lived into their 90s and I'm doing very well and so on and so forth. What I might recommend is getting a naturopath on board and getting alternative opinions that way. And I'm taking a look at that. But seek out diverse perspectives, critically evaluate that information, And then consider the devil's advocate approach. Just question it. Is it real? Is it real for me? Because we all are different. Diversify your information sources, just like you recommended to that person there, and then engage in open dialogue. Basically, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right out of Dale Carnegie, and practice self awareness. Recognize that you might be falling prey, that you might just be sitting there in front of a computer, this or that, whatever, 24/7, just getting brainwashed by anything that, again, your confirmation bias wants to take
Yep.
in, and then challenge your assumptions. Just say, are they real? I mean, there's a whole lot of different ways to do that, but the most important thing is this is just grab control. I mean, people out there know that I talk about the kindness platform, which is the original platform, which says that we all came from the one source of being, which is loving kindness as perfect creatures, and everything that is in our head as a result of our own thirst for knowledge, our own categorizing and judging, classifying things, and then using our free will to let that dominate our lives. Whereas if we get back to our own source, that's where the answers are. And everybody has that kind of source in them. And a lot of people out there have valuable information that they can share with you based upon their experiences or basic on the fact that maybe they love and care for you and they know that things are better. I mean, mindset has a whole lot to do with this as far as curing anything that's out there. As far as I'm concerned,
Yes.
that is
Yes, it
so
does.
important because if you always say yes, but no matter what anybody says, that butt's going to catch up with you and it's going to kick you right there. But, but if you can say yes and just listen and realize how you're feeling and so on and how life is going on, I'm sitting here at 70, but if people walk up to me and I tell them I'm 70 years old, they're shocked. Why? Number one, it's my mindset. Number two, it's my daily habits of exercise and just the way that I am practicing what I preach as far as the kindness platform, which is basically just approaching everything from a collaborative, compassionate point of view rather than confrontation and judging. Plain and simple. It's your choice in the present moment. And you start that with your own brain when you're confronting this
Yes, it's
confirmation bias.
and that's I guess I'm sort of wired to fight confirmation bias even within myself because I spent so many years as a reporter and learned to be a reporter back in the 80s and 90s. Now, back then, every journalism professor hammered into you the simple fact that nobody was going to print or broadcast anything unless you could verify it with three independent sources. So, and I still do that when I'm researching any problem. It's like, okay, that's the first answer, but if I'm going to act on that, I need to be able to verify that from two other sources. And I do that all the time. And unfortunately, it's actually getting harder to do that because of Google, social media, Bing, all of the other search engines, because what they're all doing is they're looking at what you are interested in and they're targeting their results to what you've already seen. So their algorithms are actually feeding confirmation bias, which is why it becomes so important that you read more, that you look at different sources. And again, you can see the more successful a person is, the more varied a background and more varied sources they tend to look at. We've talked about this in the past. The average CEO in America reads 60 books a year. The average person in America, the average non CEO, doesn't read any. Well, this is one of the reasons that those folks are CEOs because they're constantly learning and they're learning from different sources. I've talked ad infinitum about the fact that I try to read on average 100 books a year because there's always more to learn. And what you learn changes. If I learned a scientific principle, and I'm not talking about a basic scientific principle like gravity, I'm talking about something more advanced, something that has to do with medicine or biology or something like that. If I learned this fact 40 years ago, the odds are there's been new research. What I learned back then might have been right at the time, but it doesn't mean it's still right.
Oh yeah. I mean, look at all the medical advances and everything else that we've had since we were growing up. It's just amazing what we've done. However, there's all types of different things that are out there, and the fact that we now have had the internet for a whole bunch of years, so that you can just push a button and again have your confirmation bias just by going to the place where you want to go to get
Yep.
that done.
Yeah, that's why news aggregators are great because all they're doing is they're finding news from all over. Now, you do have to be careful because some of those aggregators have their own bias, and they don't bring you the news from everywhere. So you want to be finding as many sources as possible. You want to be getting your information from as many places as possible. And you actually do not want to be relying on AI either for everything. There have been several legal cases where lawyers used AI to write their legal briefs, and they submitted, these were young lawyers, they submitted their briefs to the court, and the judge went over their briefs and found out that AI had made up non-existent court cases as precedents. So you always need to do your own research. AI is a great starting point and it can point you in some great directions, but AI also needs to be fact checked. And now, unfortunately, most news sources have to be fact checked. I have a tendency in the morning to watch Fox News. I watch one program, and my wife finds it hysterical that I will yell at the television going, "No, that's wrong. You reported the other thing yesterday." It's like local news would drive me crazy because I'd be sitting there going, "No, that's not right." And unfortunately, unless you're reading a lot, unless you're getting news from a lot of different sources, you don't know that what you're being told isn't correct. Now, from a business point of view, if your bias is towards one type of sale, for example, newspaper, let's use newspaper advertising and yellow page advertising. And that's what you're focusing on. Well, guess what? When was the last time you actually looked at a print newspaper? Readership is way down. When was the last time you looked up something in the yellow pages? Probably a long time ago because most people don't even look at them anymore. If they're looking to find something instead of the yellow pages, they go to Google. So if you're not doing search engine optimization for your website, if you're not doing search engine ads or social media ads, you're probably not finding your customers. So
Yep. I mean, so many different ways out there that weren't there all those years ago. Because when
yep,
I was growing up, that's all we had. We had three television
right.
stations, and we had to listen to either Walter Cronkite or Huntley Brinkley every night, and they're not going to report different things. And we had a daily newspaper, so whatever happened, you're not going to read about until the next day. And obviously, back then, when television came out, great place to advertise. Newspapers were great, and all that other kind of thing. But I mean, we used to go to networking events at the Hartford Current 15, 20 years ago. They were great going there on a, once a
Yep.
month on a Friday morning. And they were talking about all that stuff. And that's the oldest continually running paper in the country. And now basically nobody gets the paper copy anymore. If you want the digital copy, you can pay, 12, 20, 30, $40 a month for it. And it's not even up to date. I mean, if I go in this morning, it doesn't even have the score of the Super Bowl from last night because the reporting wasn't done then. It was just,
Right.
it's just It's crazy. So you got to use your common sense. The
You
bottom
do
line
it.
is there's a saying that we've known all of our lives: trust your gut.
Yep.
And of course, if you use AI, you're going to get about 50 different, definitions of what your gut is. But if you really throw all this out, again, challenge your assumptions, diversify your information, resources, critically evaluate these things. In other words, use your brain instead of just automatically just following what's out there. I mean, that's what confirmation bias is. It's almost like getting in a trance, and you're just running your life that way. It's again what I call that is just living in the land of Sameville, Sameville, which is letting the outside world that you have no control over, and it's getting more and more and more and more crazy all the time, run your lives. But the one awareness point that we talk about all the time is that all you have is the present moment. Escape from all that stuff for one present moment, and then two, and then three, and see what happens to you. You can do it. That's what you got to do. There's all different
Right.
types of ways to get out of that. But the first thing you got to do is say, I'm going to stop right now for a second. And then I'm going to stop now for an hour. And now I'm going to stop now maybe for a day. Maybe I'm going to turn all these different things off. There's a whole lot of different ways to combat this. But most importantly, just challenge your assumptions. Ask, is this really true for me? Challenge the sources that are all out there.
You
I mean,
have
it's
to.
fun to look at all that, but
Yes, you have to challenge your sources, but you also have to simply focus on what the information is. Just because it was correct at one point doesn't mean it's still correct. There were a number of news articles that came out just in the last few days about tariffs being implemented, except by the time the article had come out, agreements had already been made that the tariffs wouldn't be coming out. So at the time the article was written, it was correct. By the time people saw it, it was no longer correct. And sometimes you just have to look at a date. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody post an article on social media that a famous person, a celebrity, passed away. And if you look at the date on the article, they passed away 12 years ago. But for some reason, this article just resurfaced, and people are going, oh, that's terrible. And it's like, did you check the date on the information you're posting?
yeah, and especially with these tariffs and all these new things that are going on with the new government. I mean, there's stuff going both ways all the time. And just
Yes.
as you said, sometimes it's just ancient news. But how do you feel, whether you're for it or against it, when somebody posts something on Facebook or this or that or whatever? Does that raise your temperature when it's not even an issue anymore? This is what we're talking about, is you can't believe everything that you see when you see it.
Yep.
It's part of critically evaluating the information. You hit the nail on the head, is take a look at the date on it.
Yeah, you have to focus, and you also have to think critically. A friend of mine sent me a video earlier today. They could not believe this was real. This was a video of an older woman dressed head to toe in Kansas City Chiefs paraphernalia, crying hysterically, obviously very upset that the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl yesterday. And as the video goes on, she starts yelling at the top of her lungs, ranting that the reason her team lost was because Donald Trump was at the game. Really? Okay, say what you will about Donald Trump, like him, hate him, whatever. Everybody has their opinion. But you need to be realistic about what he can and can't do. And certainly making the Eagles dominate the Super Bowl is a little beyond his ability.
The bottom line is the Eagles, for you football fans yesterday, they did not blitz Patrick Mahomes once. They set a Super Bowl record for sacks yesterday, and they
Yep.
stopped them cold just because they couldn't block them. They were a better team yesterday. plain and simple,
Yes.
all the way around. And I mean, yesterday before the game, I'm not patting my back, but I said on paper and the way that they played lately, they are a better team. But Kansas City, they'd won what, 15, 16 games in a row of one score or less. So they find a way to win. But when you get down 34 to nothing in the third quarter, there's some reason for that. And
Yes, you know,
it's
and it generally has to do with the people actually playing the game. As much as some of us really want to believe that our team is winning because we're wearing our lucky socks, or that they're on a streak because we're eating the same meal every day. Sports is full of these superstitions. Realistically, it comes down to the folks on the field playing the game. What they're doing is what affects the game. When
yeah,
you're running your business, it's what you actually do that affects your business. It's not some mythical market, condition. It's not, oh, the stars are aligned wrong, or my personal favorite that I yell at people every year. It's because Mercury is in retrograde. Mercury's never in retrograde. It's an optical illusion caused by the speed of the planets. You have to look at the facts, and you have to look at facts that disagree with each other to figure out what is real. When you get stuck in confirmation bias, especially when you get stuck in echo chambers like the cable news networks, like social media posts, you tend to start looking at the world as black and white. And the world has never been black and white. It's always been many, many shades of gray. And the truth is in those shades of gray. The right answer to every problem is in those shades of gray. Now, it may not be the right answer for everybody because it depends on all of the different variables that you have to deal with. But when you take all of those variables into account, if you assume the answer is the one that you want it to be, you're risking major failure because you're not looking at all of the possibilities. So that's what you have to do. It is so important that you question your beliefs, question the information you're getting. And this is, and I want to make something perfectly clear. People are not misleading you on purpose necessarily. And I'll give you a great example of, there's an old saying that, numbers don't lie. Well, numbers may not lie, but the story they're telling you could be complete fiction. And I'll give you an example of this. For decades, publications have sent out free copies of their magazines, of their newspapers, to boost their circulation because they don't make most of their money through people buying it on the newsstand or buying a subscription. They make most of their money through advertising. And the more people that get their publication, the higher a rate they can charge for advertising. Well, one example of this is Cosmopolitan Magazine. Cosmopolitan Magazine sends out free copies of their magazine. Now, I know this because no matter how hard we try to get off this list, we've been receiving free copies of Cosmopolitan for about 6 years now. Nobody in my family reads it. It comes in the mail and goes right into the recycling bin. So Cosmopolitan is counting my household among their readers when they try to sell advertising. But our household is absolutely useless to any potential advertiser in the magazine because we don't actually look at it. So
I didn't
just
even know Cosmopolitan was still out there.
it's amazing what you can find when you look.
Yeah.
But the problem is this was a practice from way back when. Goes back decades that publications did this. Now, decades ago, if something came to your house, the odds were you would at least flip through it because, as Chip said, you only had three channels on television. You didn't have the internet with everything you want to read.
Yep.
So it was something new to take a look at. Now that practice is so outdated that the information they're giving their advertisers is incorrect because they're sending it to people that never read it. So this is, their confirmation bias is, well, if we send it to them, obviously they'll read it, which is very clearly not the case.
Yeah. Once upon a time, people did look in the mail and read stuff.
Yes,
Hey, hi, internet.
exactly. People used to read their junk mail just because something came in the mail. They were curious about what it is.
Yep.
People have been conditioned now. They recognize junk mail from the envelope. They throw it right out. You know, magazines that you're not interested in that come get tossed in the recycling bin. Times change, information changes, and you have to be able to keep up with it in order to avoid what can be serious consequences of your own confirmation bias. All right, so the clock on the wall tells me we're just about out of time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners this week?
It's so important to just put things in perspective. I teach positive mindset development and maintenance. So I talk about things like smiling and positive morning routines and so on and so forth, and gratitude. The last thing I talk about is the throwouts. And these are all of your bad habits, one of which is probably spending hours a day on the internet and a lot of other places. These places where you go to just numb your mind, to get approached with things that are going to increase your confirmation bias, try turning that off for a day or for a week or just for a few hours a day and focusing on something else. That's so important. But I do want to get back to the thing that has always been there, and I mentioned it earlier. Just trust your gut. We've had that since
Yep.
mankind was walking the earth, and challenge what you're looking at, filter it out, and really work on yourself. And this might be something good to work on with some other people. Get a group together, a mastermind, to just work on that type of thing. There's all kinds of things out there. I know that you do this, Eric. Maybe you could form a group to combat confirmation bias. But the bottom line is just get back to the basics and question everything and trust your gut, because really the answer most of the time is right there.
Yes, that's so true. And you really do need to see, why is somebody, you have to ask, why is somebody telling you this? Social media has actually been proven that they keep you scrolling by giving you these hits of information that confirm your bias because that gives you a hit of dopamine, which literally causes an addiction. And confirmation bias is literally addictive because when you're shown, oh, yes, see, this is a great source and it shows I'm correct. So it makes you feel good about yourself. You have to look inside to feel good about yourself, not for outside confirmation, and realize that the more you know, the better off you are. The more you learn, the more you earn. And you have to keep learning. And it doesn't have to be all in one subject. Spread yourself out. I had a conversation not too long ago. We were talking about the latest research on the coronavirus vaccines. And a lot of what they're talking about now is not just medical research, but also history, because they're learning more about the vaccine by taking the results of what happened during this pandemic and comparing and contrasting to what happened during the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago when they didn't have a vaccine. So you wouldn't think that history would have, an impact on scientific research, but it does. And you can get better and better ideas when you take ideas from various fields: science, math, history, computers, cooking, art, Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy. The more exposure you have to different ideas, the more you will succeed and the more you'll break out of your comfort zone and get past the confirmation bias. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.